it's really important for people to understand that the concept of religious freedom, religious liberty, has been twisted since the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of the early 90s to now justify essentially religious exemptions from laws that apply to everyone else. So it's not the freedom to carry out your religion within the same body of laws that restrict everyone else. It's the freedom from laws that apply to secular people or people outside your religion.
Hello and welcome to Secular Spotlight. I'm Chris Line, legal counsel at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Last week, President Trump and other top federal officials took the stage at the 2026 National Prayer Breakfast, an event often portrayed as just a harmless display of faith. But today, we're going to unpack what really happens at the National Prayer Breakfast, who benefits from it, and why it matters for church-state separation and for democratic accountability. We'll play some clips from this year's event, and we'll discuss the powerful religious and political networks operating behind the scenes. Joining me from Washington, D.C. is our Governmental Affairs Director, Mark Dann.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're also joined by journalist Jonathan Larsen. For years now, Jonathan has provided the clearest and most unflinching coverage of the National Prayer Breakfast, an event that's long masqueraded as a harmless display of bipartisan faith while functioning as a shadowy hub for right-wing religious influence. So we've got him here today as we unpack this year's National Prayer Breakfast, and he's got a lot of info about prayer breakfasts from the past and the things that we've been able to do to try to tamp down on that and all the problems surrounding it. Let's just get started, Jonathan. What's changed this year with the prayer breakfast? What used to happen? What's now happening? Kind of give us some background on the prayer breakfast and all the coverage you've done over the years.
So if folks don't know, it started in 1953. It arose out of sort of an anti-labor drive at a time when, the U.S., right wing in the U.S. was very interested in pushing back against organized labor, pushing back against the threat of communism, and wielded Christianity to that effect. Fast forward many decades, and in the early 2000s, author Jeff Sharlet and a bunch of other people began to report on and expose how the prayer breakfast was part of a much bigger shadow diplomacy effort being carried out by the organizers, a group known as the Family, formerly legally called the Fellowship Foundation, and how they had been pushing right-wing policies and building right-wing networks around the world, sometimes with catastrophic consequences for the countries involved. Now, during COVID, there was a growing attention, some of it coming from my reporting, on some of the more recent things that the Fellowship Foundation was doing that were connected to the prayer breakfast. And as a result of that, as well as advocacy by FFRF and others, a lot of Democrats who had been stalwarts of the prayer breakfast began to distance themselves, stop going, disavow the breakfast. And that's really important because these are not official events. The presence and leadership of Democrats there gives it a veneer of semi-official status. And that is essentially what powers this engine, because without that, they can't attract literally thousands of people who go to the breakfast every year. So to try to maintain, this is my speculation, they said they had different reasons for it, but Chris Coons, who was probably the most vocal Democrat, who was the Delaware senator, he was the most vocal Democratic sort of spokesperson for the fellowship. And he came out and said, we had questions that we were getting questions that we couldn't answer about who's invited, who decides who's invited, who's paying for all of this. And so the remedy they came up with was, we're going to spin off a satellite group called the NPB Foundation, and they'll hold a squeaky clean, much smaller breakfast up on Capitol Hill. And it seemed at first that there was a considerable amount of coordination and cooperation, perhaps more than they wanted people to know about, behind the scenes. What was fascinating about this year's was you had two, but there are lots of indicators that there was a lot of friction involved, and a lot of last minute jockeying. Bill Lee, who I believe was the keynote, he's the Tennessee governor, Republican, he gave the keynote speech at the big National Prayer Breakfast, which is held downhill from Capitol Hill at the Washington Hilton. He said he only found out the day before that he was going to be the keynote speaker. The NPB Foundation, which did the Capitol Hill version, the supposedly squeaky clean one, just a couple weeks before the breakfast, their invitation said they didn't even have a location yet. So and the co-chairs for the big one, they announced on January 7th, if memory serves, that the two were going to be reunited as one. And then a couple weeks later, the NPB Foundation announces theirs is going to be up on Capitol Hill. So it certainly seems like behind the scenes, there was a lot going on in terms of conflicts over what they were going to do and how they were going to do it. So those were, and in fact, they were literally, for the first time this year, both of them, each one of them, called themselves the National Prayer Breakfast. Only the downhill one got any attention because that's the one Donald Trump went to. Unlike last year, he blew off the Capitol Hill one. So we're seeing signs of some sort of rift or realignment within the Fellowship Foundation's international, within the organization and within its allies. And what that realignment is going to mean kind of remains to be seen, but I'm very curious at this point.
And also within the prayer breakfast itself, there was extremely low Democratic participation. We could only find, I think, 2 Democrats who did participate in the event at the Hilton, a handful of senators at the prayer breakfast on the Senate side. Very low participation. No Schumers, no Schumer, no Jeffries, no Pelosi. Minimal attention, especially to the Senate side one as well. And as Jonathan mentioned, that this has been a stalwart of the marketing around this is, this is just a bipartisan, good-natured Bonhomme event. We're going to get into a few minutes later that is clearly not the case anymore. We've been warning members of Congress that has not been the case for years, and it paid off. Plus, this year, advocating for it, we FFRF Action Fund had a very large role in encouraging members not to go, and we had a lot of really good partners, whether it was Vote Common Good, Faithful America, as well. Plus, we had over 40 organizations and elected officials joining in and asking members of Congress not to attend the National Prayer Breakfast. So it was a very strong coalition in opposition this year as well.
Yeah, that's great, Mark. We have some great work there. And of course, we saw that those who decided to ignore our requests were, we'll get to this in a little bit too, based on Trump's comments, but were treated very well for their decision to show up.
We'll do more on that. Yes, we'll do more on that. Yes, not exactly, once again, showing that Trump is not quite the unifier in chief.
Jonathan helped uncover a lot of the story about the National Prayer Breakfast. And as we talked about it, bizarrely split into 2 to try to convince people to come. And for whatever reason, that still seems to be working a little bit. I don't know why lawmakers still think that it's worthwhile to do this. Do you know specifically sort of the messaging that is being, when the prayer breakfast is still being marketed to the public and to lawmakers? What are they saying? How are they still convincing all of these people to come to this what is clearly now a very political event, despite sort of the bipartisan facade? Are
you talking about the fellowships downhill or the smaller one at Capitol Hill?
I guess, yeah, that's a good point. I guess I think obviously, we're kind of saying that they benefit from that distinction. I mean, yeah, there were very few, I had to read a lot of news stories about this, and very few made a clear distinction about, they just said Trump spoke at the National Prayer Breakfast. They didn't say which one or that there were 2. I think most outlets just assumed and treated it as though that Trump event at the Hilton was the only national prayer breakfast. There was very little coverage of the other one. But yeah, I guess I understand what is getting people to the Capitol Hill, the cleaner one. But it's weird that people are still showing up for what turned out to be like a Christian nationalist rally, at the Hilton one. And I think there were like 3 Democrats, I think, that went to that. And then obviously Trump insulted them there. But do you know what would have possessed them to still go? Are they still just under the belief that somehow this is in some way bipartisan and that they'd have been welcomed and that this was about faith at all or anything?
I would guess that the Democrats who went to the downhill one, the Fellowship Foundation, it was co-chaired by Congressman Jonathan Jackson, Democrat of Illinois. Lou Correa of California spoke, and Tom Suozzi, Democrat of New York, was visible in the House choir, and they all have history there. And I think they would disagree with the way you two have characterized the thing. One thing that I think is underappreciated is that, and Mark, maybe you've experienced this or come up against this on the Hill, but probably the driving force behind Democratic participation in these things is the relationships they build in their weekly prayer breakfasts. The fellowship started, and I don't know how much they're still involved in, weekly prayer breakfasts where members of both parties go. I believe it's Wednesday mornings. I could be wrong about that. And they share fellowship and they share stories and they don't talk politics and they connect on a personal level. And some of these people have also been connected with associates within the Fellowship Foundation who literally are paid to minister to people in power. So some of them have had relationships with, anonymous to the public associates of the fellowship who literally their livelihood is, I hang out with members of Congress and I make them feel good and I make sure they're feeling okay and not questioning themselves too much just because their constituents aren't happy about things. I'm being a little facetious, but I think those relationships are probably the driving force in terms of the politics and whether it's bipartisan. My guess would be that it's not too difficult for some of these folks to look at and hear what President Trump said and argue that's why it's all the more important that I keep showing up. If you don't like this now, imagine what it could become if Democrats abandon it entirely and if they abandon all outreach to the Democrats. And you don't have to imagine too hard because right around the same time, you had the National Gathering for Prayer and Repentance, which was exactly that. This is Mike Johnson's thing, entirely free of Democrats, openly theocratic. So I could see the 3 Democrats still participating in the fellowship's prayer breakfast as arguing that they're doing a service. And by the way, I can't prove that they're wrong. I don't, I obviously think there are problems with them attending and participating and helping, given what they're doing. Like we haven't even talked about the fact that the star speaker on that Thursday was Nayib Bukele, the self-professed dictator of El Salvador, who has been credibly accused by victims and by human rights groups of wholesale abuse of civil rights and human rights, and who has suspended due process for the past 3 or 4 years. That's who got a boost on an international stage. That's who was portrayed as the beneficiary of God's providence, as if God had ordained Bukele's regime. And so I think the most important thing is if Democrats or Republicans are going to do this, their voters should know about it.
Absolutely. And I think that it's really important to note that I mean, compared to what we saw, I mean, on the few pictures we can find, the one on the hillside, on the Senate one, was not well attended at all. And I think what Jonathan said is correct. Of some of the feedback that we have gotten from Hill is that they do want to maintain relations. If things are bad now, just wait. If we didn't partake in this as well, I don't think that's very credible, and we clearly don't agree with that perspective. But I think that is kind of a driving force with the few remaining members that do attend this from the Democratic side.
Yeah, the Capitol Hill one that was stark. There were a couple of wide shots, and you could see. First of all, it was in a smaller chamber. They had a tight shot. It was maybe, 2 or 3 dozen people there, plenty of empty seats as soon as you took a wide shot. And there were not what I found interesting. There were 4 Democrats, I believe, who I spotted. 3 of them participated. And I also saw Coons in the audience, which was also interesting because, as I mentioned, Coons has been a long time insider at the fellowship, and apparently he was not at their one big signature event. Now, it's important for people to remember that the fellowship's event sprawls over 2 days. It used to be 4 days, now it's only 2 days, but that means that it's possible that Coons did show up for some of their separate private things. They have a luncheon, they have a dinner, they have these breakout sessions where all kinds of interesting things happen. So it's possible he was there, but it was interesting, and I thought worth noting. And also the fact every Democrat, this is getting a little in the weeds, but every Democrat at the Fellowship Foundation's National Prayer Breakfast was a House member. Every Democrat that I saw at the Capitol Hill version was a Senate member. Mm-hmm. Whether that reflects something about how the 2 different chambers' weekly prayer breakfasts are going, I have no idea.
Yeah, that's an interesting connection. I'm glad you point that out. But yeah, that was sort of my takeaway in sort of watching these for FFRF, that I skimmed through mostly the one on the Hill, and it just really struck me as like a prayer event. There was a lot less Christian nationalism, whereas like everything at the other event was like not just, oh, I'm going to pray and this is my personal faith. It was like, we are a Christian nation, type stuff from like Trump, Hegseth, people like that. Whereas the bits I saw from the Capitol Hill event were much more like, we're going to like lead a prayer. And it's going to be a little bit more tied to like faith as opposed to like a big political thing that's, trying to really portray America as a Christian nation. That was just at least the difference that I noticed from my perspective.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't argue with that. I would also say, though, that I did hear some rhetoric from Democrats at the Capitol Hill version that was a little bit more of, in Jesus' name we pray, mm-hmm. which is exclusionary, right? It's sectarian, and it's also defining we as being Christian, so leaving out Jews, Muslims, other faiths, non-religious people of all stripes. So I actually did a story several years ago talking to a chaplain about there are like guidelines for how to do these kinds of things. And I forget the name, but there's essentially a trade group, and they have guidelines. And the idea is, if you're going to say Jesus, you say I pray, not we pray. It's arrogant, and problematic to say we're all praying in my God's name. Well, not when I'm watching. You're not. So that was, it's a much more subtle thing certainly than we saw at the Downhill, the Fellowship Foundation's National Prayer Breakfast, but it's also still problematic. But on the bright side, at least they're not doing it in the Capitol anymore, which again is also like, I would love to know why that's the case too.
So, Jonathan, Mark, how can our listeners continue to stay informed about the National Prayer Breakfast throughout the years, and like, what can they do to help push back and make sure that this event becomes less and less popular, that we can, hopefully get all the lawmakers to stop attending it and just kind of wrap it up for good? Like, what can people do to help?
I was going to say, read Jonathan Larsen's reporting is a good place to start with a lot of this as well. But again, let's just pause for a second and think about where we were and where we are today. A few years ago, members of Congress, both parties couldn't wait to get down to the Hilton to genuflect before the Grahams and stuff. Well, first of all, the Grahams are out. So that's a big deal on this one. There's been opening questions about something that, I mean, next to the cherry blossoms was always something on the calendar for DC. That's out the window now. You've got almost uniformity on the Democratic side saying this is not good in any capacity and are walking away from it. That's a big deal. So in terms of how we're able to push back, we're doing great in keeping things on. I would say reach out to your friends and neighbors. We had a lot of really good friends from religious communities. As mentioned, Faithful America, Vote Common Good. We also saw Interfaith Alliance, good friends, come on to the sign-on letter. We saw Americans United with a lot of good work on this, Dignity USA. So more folks, more local elected officials came on. Thanks a lot of really good outreach with Mickey Dolenz. We had, I think, 10 state local elected officials sign on to the letter, plus an additional 5 as well. So that's really well of expanding. So keep talking about this with your neighbors. Keep bringing more of your friends in on this one as well. And then I think with our coalition, we're going to be looking at ways we can continually stand up and have victories against MAGA Christianity and Christian nationalism throughout the year.
Awesome. All right, so we'll transition, then we'll go ahead and look at some clips from this year's prayer breakfast. We can make some commentary on it, just kind of show people like what was said at this event and why it's so problematic. Let's see how White House Faith Office Senior Advisor Paula White set the tone for the prayer breakfast.
It is an honor to stand in this sacred gathering where faith, leadership, and conscience meet at the National Prayer Breakfast, a moment that reminds our nation and the world that faith matters, prayer matters, and awareness of God's sovereignty matters, something the President reminded us of last year when he publicly gave God praise for the miracle of his life and God's sovereign plan. We give thanks for a president who understands that faith is not a private afterthought, but a public good. A president who has not merely spoken about faith, but has acted to protect it, defend it, and to elevate it to the highest level possible. I can say without hesitation that no president in modern history, or perhaps all of history, has done more structurally, substantively, and sincerely to elevate and protect religious liberty.
There's a lot to get into there, right? I mean, it's one thing to say faith matters. No one's going to dispute that. But to say that we all need to be aware that God, A, exists and B, is our boss, this is something that you should not be getting from U.S. officials. This is deeply, I would argue, if it were an impeachable position, impeachably problematic. This is not something that, the First Amendment makes quite clear. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And there she is, respecting an establishment of religion and helping to establish it. And the other thing that we can get into or not is it's really important for people to understand that the concept of religious freedom, religious liberty, has been twisted since the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of the early 90s to now justify essentially religious exemptions from laws that apply to everyone else. So it's not the freedom to carry out your religion within the same body of laws that restrict everyone else. It's the freedom from laws that apply to secular people or people outside your religion.
Right, and that you're pointing out, that was one thing that stood out to me in her comments there, that she creates this false dichotomy that it's either, faith either has to be a private afterthought or a public good, with no contemplation that it could be a private good. That the idea that you have your faith and you keep it, private as a part of your personal life, that's a good place for it. That unless you're able to push it onto others, and in this case through the government, then it doesn't have any value unless you're, pushing it, like that your private faith doesn't have any value, which of course is the opposite of religious liberty. Religious liberty is about, holding your own beliefs, which you can't do if the government tries to impose a set of beliefs on you. So I think that's a good point, Jonathan.
And we've seen Paula White is really interesting on a lot of this. The way I'm looking at this was really her anointing as the MAGA pastor in chief. With the prayer breakfast, it used to be the Grahams. She's clearly in the pole position. She's leading the Religious Liberty Commission. We have a lot of reporting from Africa about her religious diplomacy. And one of the things that we've been warning members about is that the prayer breakfast is really a tool for influence peddling and getting the ear of the Trump administration. We saw this during the first Trump term of with Maria Butina with Russian influence peddling. That seems to be stepping up a lot on this as well. You saw the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo being feted at the National Prayer Breakfast as well. I would be very surprised if you don't see more connections between the Trump administration, natural resources, and the Democratic Republic of Congo in the near future as well. So look for Paula White to be more of a power broker in especially MAGA Christianity circles, people to influence the Trump administration. And I think you're going to see her do very well in the next few years.
Yeah.
And there's also a certain hypocrisy about her call for, we should be seeing more religion in the public sphere. Well, okay, but most of the work that's being done in the name of religion is secretive. They close it off. Like, if you want to do this, if you want to have these religious meetings, great. Set up a camera, live stream it. Let's see what you're doing. Let's make, you want it to be public, make it public. Go right ahead. If these are private organizations and they want to do that, I've got no problem with that. But let's not pretend that this is about, we're just being transparent and practicing our religion in the public sphere. You're not. You're putting on a show. The real work, as Mark was saying, like the lobbying, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is a longtime insider at the fellowship, and he scheduled a critical minerals summit for exactly the same week as the National Prayer Breakfast with the Democratic Republic of the Congo there, among other nations. It was clearly an open embrace of exactly what used to be problematic about the event, which was it was a lobbying palooza, international bazaar, only we didn't get to see that part.
So after Paula White spoke, President Trump delivered a speech that was more than an hour long. Most of it was his typical ramblings that have absolutely nothing to do with religion, prayer, faith. But there are a few moments that stood out to us that we're going to go ahead and share from his speech.
I don't know how a person of faith can vote for a Democrat. I really don't. And I know we have some here today, and I don't know why they're here, because they certainly don't give us their vote.
Yeah, so that's what I was obviously referencing earlier in the show, that for those Democrats who did choose to show up to this meeting and giving it that sort of bipartisan vibe, this is how they were rewarded with an insult and being asked why they're there.
I mean, I don't mean to diminish the work that the FFRF and other groups have done, but it's hard for me to imagine that it was any more effective than what Donald Trump accomplished in about an hour to make clear to everyone what this event is and how non-inclusive it is of Democrats and Democratic beliefs and positions, and how openly they reject the validity and authenticity of progressive, democratic, left-leaning religious belief, which is a real thing.
And I mean, the marketing around the National Prayer Breakfast used to be bipartisan. We're going to keep politics out on it. Interfaith Alliance did some really good videos on Instagram and talked with some members about how they backed away. And their impression of how they saw it was that it was just that was nonpartisan, and we're going to leave all that aside. Clearly, that didn't happen. And yes, Trump supercharged all of that. So we informed a lot of members of Congress this is exactly what could happen. This is exactly what did happen. And this is what has been happening as well. So I think for most members, this is just going to be blatantly obvious on it. And one of the things to touch back a little bit more is what Paula White did, and Jonathan, in some of our discussions, is that when she said a president who has not merely spoken about faith but has acted on it, well, most of his comments had nothing to do with faith or his actions, and it seemed a lot of his remarks fell flat on that, and it didn't really energize the crowd much. The times where he was speaking out of faith, he just kind of wanted to rush over it and talk about, I don't know, weird stuff. But it seems that Trump, as being the evangelical in chief, which is what folks in MAGA Christianity world want him to be, he seems to be falling short of that.
Yeah, as a Christian performer, I certainly think that's the case. And certainly for that audience, because that audience is, no pun intended, pretty agnostic about a lot of religious stuff. A lot of them are there for other reasons. And a lot of them have meetings set up with Democrats, if not at the Washington Hilton, then elsewhere during the week. I wish I could remember the thing he quoted, but his attitude towards religion, Christianity, and the Bible, I thought came across perfectly in a very little noticed remark. He quoted like one sentence or so from the Bible. I don't remember what it was offhand. And then he said, "That's true." And I loved the idea that he, in his mind, the 3,000 people there were waiting to find out from his affirmation whether or not the Bible got it right. So yeah, I think culturally, Mark, as you were saying, he's a terrible ambassador for his cause, for his own cause. Paula White is obviously much more effective on his behalf than he is on his own behalf. Whatever religious beliefs he may or may not have, and I don't want to be one of those people who sort of assumes, well, he can't really be religious, which to me sounds like a slur on atheists. But whatever he has, he's clearly disinterested in them. You know, he shows intellectual curiosity about them. He doesn't, at a few prayer breakfasts ago, I think he basically, maybe it was during his first term, I think he said something like, I don't like all that love your enemies thing. I'm a different guy. This is the most foundational tenet of the New Testament, of Jesus' teachings. And he's basically like, yeah, I don't like that one too much. So he is, to your point, Mark, historically, epically bad at communicating about religious things to religious people. I think they prefer hearing him talk about the things they care about because of their religion. About their actual religion and faith and beliefs themselves, a little less effective.
I don't know about that, Jonathan. We'll go ahead and show here. We'll cut to, we have a clip of Trump making his sales pitch for religion, and I think you might find it quite compelling.
You have to have religion. You have to have it. You have to have faith. You have to have God. And thankfully, as we gather today, there are many signs that religion is coming back, and now it's no longer signs. It's just coming back. It's coming back so strong. You know, your churches are filling up. You didn't have that 2 years ago.
Yeah, so you can see just deeply, just ready to preach the gospel.
I thought you were being serious, Chris. It's not even true. And the applause for that was so tepid. My guess is they know it's not true, and or they don't care. But also his argument for religious belief was one of the most sort of puerile and primeval ones, which is basically he's saying, I believe in God because, or excuse me, it wasn't even that. He's basically saying, I don't sin because I'm afraid of hell. Basically saying, imagine what a monster I would be if I weren't in check. I don't think this is as effective an argument as Trump may think it is on other people.
And also, we've seen things from Kristen Wagner, the head of Alliance Defending Freedom. And one of the things she said at one of the Religious Liberty Commission is that we may have won power, but we haven't changed hearts and minds. And I think there's a fair amount of hoping Trump would be changing hearts and minds. And that's not happening. Despite what the president said, and we all know it's not true, surprise, the pews are not filling up, and people are not really, there's not a huge mass embrace of MAGA Christianity. And I think that is where some of our opposition starts to get a little nervous.
Yeah, and Trump did say that, basically he connected and said that we have to be a Christian nation, or that you have to have religion. We have a clip.
I've always said, you just can't have a great country if you don't have religion. You have to believe in something. You have to believe that what we're doing, there's a reason for it.
Yeah, I would argue that you can't have a great country if religion's being forced on everyone. Now, if you're talking about religious liberty, which of course he's not, I do believe, that's necessary for a great country. And I think that's what's made America so great, is that we all are free to believe whatever we want or not believe, and the government isn't supposed to take a position on that. So just completely the opposite of the messaging that he's doing there. I mean, this is obviously just what we were talking about, the Christian nationalist pandering to an audience of religious people to try to feign and make it seem like he really cares about religion, and just really just turning it into a political weapon, which of course is what we're kind of saying, that's the whole point of this National Prayer Breakfast, basically.
But I also don't think it's an effective message for anyone who doesn't already agree with it. For one thing, it's such a blinkered view of humanity and social existence. This idea that atheists or secular people don't believe in anything is of course absurd. We believe in lots of things. What he's saying is, if you don't believe in this magic stuff, well, then what's the point? The point is all the other things we believe in. It's each other, it's ourselves, it's our ideas, it's our principles, it's the future, right? These are all things that actually do motivate people to do good in the world, to fight for a more perfect union. And I think even if people don't think it through, I think on some level, people get that it resonates with them. I'm not motivated every second of every day just by the fact that I believe in some magic stuff. I'm motivated by lots of other things too. And so I think whether that was genuine pandering or insincere pandering, I think it falls flat even with a lot of the people who might otherwise be potentially receptive to it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that we know not everyone's falling for this. And I think that hopefully, we'll see, as we've seen what the Christian nationalists are doing and how it's hurting our country, that more people will kind of break the spell in the sense that anyone was sort of persuaded by, religious connection to support the actions that we've seen. So, yeah, hopefully this is going to lead to better things.
And I think you're also seeing a lot of our friends in the faith-based community. A big person who's been very helpful, Reverend Doug Padgett from Vote Common Good, has been on the front lines in Minnesota and Minneapolis. And really most people who are religious, who are really good friends with FFRF and vice versa, support the separation of state and church. And quite frankly, we wouldn't be as an effective check on MAGA Christianity without their help. And they do a lot of really good work.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and wrap up with one final clip. So after Trump spoke, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth came out, and I think his messaging was, he's a more true believer messenger of this stuff. I think he, to your point that Trump is not delivering a great message on this evangelical stuff, Hegseth, every chance he gets, is preaching and trying to affiliate the government with religion. And he did so right after Trump spoke. So we have a clip of that.
Today we gather to recognize that our rights here in this great country come from a loving and benevolent God, not government. America was founded as a Christian nation, It remains a Christian nation in our DNA if we can keep it. At the War Department, we see ourselves as the Strength Department. But we also need to remember that we derive our strength through faith and through truth and through the Word of God.
It is absolutely terrifying to see the Secretary of Defense, now War, just speaking with that religious crusades fervor and, claiming we're a Christian nation and sort of implying that he's going to ensure that our military forces are Christian forces fighting not for us and to protect our secular constitution, but to protect our Christian nation. Probably a little bit more concerning to me than the sort of ramblings that Trump had on religion at the event.
And what a slur against all the people he supposedly leads, right? What a smear of people like Pat Tillman, who gave their lives motivated by something other than what motivates Pete Hegseth. So it was vile. It was vile. It was wrong and all of that. And it's bad that it happened. It's a terrible, lamentable state that brings us to a place where that can even happen. But I always try to look on the bright side. People recognize this stuff. The number of people who agree with and like and want not just the specifics of what Hegseth is saying, but the tone in which he says it, which is, by the way, not the tone of someone who's thrilled about having a loving, benevolent God. This is clearly someone who is dying to have a drunk guy, bump into him in a bar. And I think the cultural tone of it, the language, his demeanor, I think all of it, again, no slight to FFRF, I suspect it does wonders in terms of alienating people from both of his causes, religious and political.
And I think for a lot of people in the audience, Hegseth may have upstaged his boss. So as we all know, that's not a great idea around Trump. With Hegseth, I think a lot of us think about where he prioritizes things. We all remember him calling back generals and admirals from active war zones, and the picture from it of all of the admirals and in general just looking stone cold at him. You didn't need, and that picture, I think it was in Time, of everyone just glaring at him, I think conveys a lot of sentiment as well. And I think, man, if he could spend as much time as on it just with all this weird stuff as he could spend it fighting Putin, that would be really helpful. But unfortunately, this is where his priorities are. And it's really sad that this is what he thinks are the biggest threats to America, and not people like Putin or ISIS or anything along those lines.
Yeah, and as we've covered this, he's not just talking about this at events like this. He actually holds a monthly prayer service at the Pentagon. The first time a government department has held official prayer services as a part of the governmental work week on government property. And then now the Department of Labor has copied that. So just one of the true great threats, Christian nationalist threats that we have is Hegseth in the Department of Defense.
I would also throw out there, the Pentagon confirmed to me that Hegseth has attended the weekly Bible study for White House officials, cabinet officials, led by Ralph Drollinger of Capitol Ministries, who is so far to the right of the National Prayer Breakfast that he says National Prayer Breakfasts are an ecumenical curse on the nation. So that's how deep down this particular rabbit hole Hegseth has found himself.
Yeah, and he's also, I know Hegseth is connected with like Doug Wilson and his church and everything. So I think that's the scary part about Hegseth, is that he's clearly a true believer. Like, he is deep within the religion and actually wants to advance Christianity and have a Christian government. So alarming stuff from the prayer breakfast, and hopefully, next year we will see more lawmakers drop out, hopefully all of them, and obviously FFRF Action Fund will be working to make that happen, and we'll be relying on Jonathan to be reporting everything that's going on so we're able to know what's going on, and hopefully our viewers will check out Jonathan's stuff and can learn more about it and follow up on that. So that's going to wrap up this week's episode of Secular Spotlight. If you believe government should answer to the Constitution, not to religious power brokers, you can support our work at ffrf.org. Your membership helps us hold lawmakers accountable and to defend the separation of church and state nationwide. Be sure to like this episode and subscribe so you don't miss future coverage of the issues shaping secular advocacy and constitutional rights. And thank you for tuning in.
I'm Doug Hinahara, and I'm an out-of-the-closet atheist. And around the time I was 17, I was told by a fundamentalist Christian that my grandmother, who had emigrated from Japan, was destined to eternal damnation because she was a Buddhist. And I couldn't accept that, and it kind of unraveled from there for me.